The next topic that we wanted to discuss was faith schools. And again, Andrew, if I could perhaps ask you to be aware that the majority of this audience is probably not from the UK, and they're not familiar with the position so far as faith schools are concerned in this country. Perhaps you could explain what the position is.
In the UK, or rather England and Wales, because the situation is totally different in Scotland, in England and Wales, rather like every other European country, our school system is very much an artefact of our religious and cultural history. So when we introduced state education, universal state education, a lot of schools that were run before that point by churches were incorporated into our own public school, as you'd say in America, public school system. So we're now in a situation in Britain, England and Wales, where a third of our state-funded schools are 100% publicly funded out of taxpayers' money, but are effectively controlled to a lesser or greater extent by religious organisations. Mostly the Church of England. Second after that, the Roman Catholic Church has a very large number of state schools. And increasingly, and recently for the first time, Muslim schools, Sikh schools, Hindu schools, and so on. There are a smaller number of Jewish schools as well. Now, those schools can discriminate in their admissions policies based on the religion of the parents of the children who apply to that school. They can choose, the children of Christian parents or the children of other non-Christian religions, and exclude the children of parents who are of the wrong or of no religion. They can discriminate in their employment, often not just for teaching staff, but for non-teaching staff, for bursarial staff or clerical staff. And they're not bound by the same rules and legislation on curriculum as other state-funded schools are. So they're permitted to religiously instruct their pupils, teach them that one particular religion is the true one and other things are not true, and so on and so forth.
Can I just pause you there? I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, I think a lot of the expansion of faith schools occurred under the premiership of Tony Blair.
Sure.
Including the particular school I wanted to talk about was the one in Gateshead, which I think was one of the first under his administration, which actually teaches creationism. Am I wrong about that?
No, you're right about that. I mean, that sort of was the next thing I was coming to, which is to say that these schools are a long-standing part of our education system, but in the last 10 years, there's been a deliberate policy to expand them. And you're completely right. That expansion began under Tony Blair when he was Prime Minister. And one of the very earliest examples of that expansion is the Vardy-sponsored academy in the Northeast, which was outed by teachers who were working there, who'd been transitioned from another state-funded school, outed as teaching creationism in their science. And not just creationism in their science, really, but quite strange Christian-inspired beliefs across the curriculum, things like seeing the providence of God in history and so on. But yes, creationism. And the government of the day refused to do anything about this. They said they were perfectly happy for the teaching of creationism to go ahead as a legitimate part of the diversity of the state-funded school system. Later on, the government of Gordon Brown issued some much stronger guidance against creationism. But again, now with our own current government, which is a coalition government between the Conservative Party and the Liberal Party, again, creationist groups have been given state-funded schools to run. 3 schools just very recently, state-funded schools opened up, run by creationist groups. Now, whether or not they'll be teaching creationism in those schools is a matter of debate. They say that they won't in science. Whether you believe them or not is up to you. And you might also question whether it's acceptable to teach it in other subjects apart from science, even if you're not teaching it in science. There's a real problem there. I think that, unlike some other parts of the world, the problem of creationism in our school system is a lot less significant. I think one of the main problems in our school system from a religious point of view and in religious schools is firstly the segregation of children within these schools that discriminate. And that's especially significant as more sorts of religious schools come into the system. So with things like Muslim schools, for example, there's an ethnic segregation factor as well as a religious segregation factor, and that's really damaging thinking about the future of our society. So that's a big issue. And also then the curriculum issue in terms of having religious instruction at public expense, rather than teaching young people what they need to know, which is that there's a diversity of beliefs, including non-religious ones in this world, which have complicated cultural histories, and, you know, about which opinion is divided in society and in the world as a whole. I think it's very important, by the way, for young people to learn about different religions and non-religious philosophers in their schools. I think it's one of the things actually that's given us quite a secular generation in the UK, is that, you know, when I was at school, you did learn about lots of different religions, and you very rapidly, of course, in that scenario, see that they can't all be true, and if they're not all true, maybe none of them are true. So I think it's a good and salutary lesson, but I think that any state-funded school that teaches or is allowed to teach only one religion as being the, you know, reality is completely unacceptable. And as I say, a third of our public schools do that.
Yes, and I'm with you in teaching people about religions, because I think that's probably one of the best ways of getting rid of them. But it should be taught in the history lesson, not in a religious lesson. A couple of quick points. Basically, what you're saying, 1/3 of faith schools are funded by the taxpayer, and they have pretty much freedom to determine who they employ and what pupils they'll take. I just think it's disgraceful. And I remember Tony Blair, I think, being asked about this school in Gateshead, and he sort of like fudged it, much like he and someone was commenting in the chat as you were speaking. I think they put it that Hitchens handed Tony Blair his ass in his debate. Yeah, I mean, the arguments that I heard Blair come out with in his debate with Hitchens were as convincing as the ones he came out with to support this public school, and said, well, it's got good grades in other things, so why shouldn't we stop it? But this was a time, let's not forget, that he had converted to Catholicism, but not mentioned it to the general public because he didn't want to be labelled with a nutter banner. Michael, tell us what the position is in Canada.
Well, I think much like it is in Britain, it's an artifact of our history. In the 1800s, there was basically, before Confederation of Canada, there was Upper and Lower Canada, Upper being the English-speaking Protestant Canada, and Lower Canada, which became Quebec, was French and Catholic. So they developed two separate school systems. One was based on Protestant teachings, which became the public school system, and then there's also the Catholic system, which has maintained until this day. Now, it only maintains, interestingly, in Ontario, which was formerly the Protestant majority territory within Canada. Quebec has gotten rid of a publicly funded Catholic school system. Newfoundland got rid of it. It is only right now in Ontario that they have a publicly funded Catholic school system, where, again, a lot of the same sorts of problems arise, where there is a division of authority between the bishops, which ultimately are responsible for the religious teaching and a lot of what functionally happens every day in these schools, and the government, which is increasingly and ever more secular and ever more diverse and multicultural. It's actually an open question why it's still tolerated in Ontario. Our organization has worked a lot on this front. There's a one school system network of collaborative organizations that we're a part of. 70% of Ontarians want to get rid of the publicly funded Catholic school system. There's just lists like my arm long of different types of violations that happened, like discrimination of hiring teachers based on sexual orientation or religious basis, the institutional marginalization of gay students within schools, the teaching of patently false ideas within schools until changes happened into their religious atmosphere. It's really something that's completely intolerable and way out of step with what many Canadians actually think and believe. I think if I were to make a hypothesis about why it's still around, it's merely that no one has the political will to actually enforce that sort of change. It would be an overhauling of an entire school system. And when it happened in Quebec and in Newfoundland, that was done basically in the wake of either extreme financial difficulties in maintaining two school systems, or in the wake, in the case of Newfoundland, of sexual abuse scandals within the Catholic Church. So there has to be basically something very big, and I don't understand, frankly, why billions of dollars worth of wasted taxpayer money isn't good enough. But there has to be something big enough for people to actually sit up and pay attention to that. Because it is a very serious problem. Again, we have multiple cases of discrimination and human rights violation. And fundamentally, I think also Canadians value multiculturalism very much. It's part of their political and social identity to be accepting and welcoming of all different cultures. And it's very difficult for us to maintain that idea when we privilege essentially one form of religious discussion over every other kind. How do we honestly say to Sikhs coming into our country that they're just as valuable to society when we don't pay for their school system? We only pay for the Catholic system, and we do it, again, in the face of many good reasons, financial and otherwise, about why it should be eliminated. And in fact, also, like when you get right down to it, it's in the face of even a democratic decision. Again, most people are against the system, but it maintains nonetheless.
Concordance.
I would like to say that all public schools, because of our more or less constitutional separation of church and state, all public schools must, of necessity, be separated from religious favor. But of course, history of the U.S. and education and creationism tells a very different story. Thankfully, people like Ra, for example, who put all this effort into maintaining that wall between church and state, and people like me who get to be free riders from their hard work, it's progressed through a lot of growing pains. What I want to mention, what I want to highlight on this issue is the sudden increase in the U.S. of homeschooling, because I think that's where creationism has its strongest position. And I'm looking at the demographic data here from the official U.S. Census Bureau. In 1994, there were an estimated 350,000 students that were homeschooled. Today, that number is 800,000. I'm sorry, no, that's 1999. It hit 800,000. There's probably over 1 million by now. It's doubling on a very short time scale. And the reasons why people give, you have people who say they can give a better education to their kids at home than the public schools, but 33% cited religious reasons for the reasons why they're homeschooling. So about a third of those million, about 300,000 kids, are being taught creationism either through a sort of a homeschool loosely based on a church. These are our faith schools to a certain extent, and they're very rapidly growing. And I don't know why private schools haven't filled that niche, but people apparently want absolute control over the kind of creationist material that's being taught to their kids.
If I can jump in, I just want to say I do, again, finding it very interesting differences between the countries here in that, because I think constitutionally, legally, socially, Americans do value freedom quite a bit more than probably Europeans and Canadians do. And if we look at just the way we framed this last issue in Canadian parlance, it really comes down to a protection of groups and the rights of groups in society. And I think that might explain why there's fewer private schools. It's that the actual systemic desire on the part of many Americans is not to is actually towards freedom, to have that, again, as you were saying, complete control over what your child is learning.
I mean, again, this whole homeschooling issue, I think, is a much bigger issue in America than it is in the United Kingdom. Andrew, tell us about homeschooling in the United Kingdom. I mean, does it really exist in any way?
There are parents who homeschool, and there is a right to homeschool if you can provide the adequate education for your children, but it's actually a lot more regulated than it is in lots of other parts of the world. So the parents have a responsibility to secure education for their children, and the local authorities, which are local government bodies in England and Wales, will actually send inspectors into home schooling environments to make sure that what's being provided is appropriate. And there are various...
Can I just pause it? Am I right to that the education authorities check that what the children are being taught actually conforms with the curriculum of mainstream schools?
It has to conform. Yeah, it has to conform with the minimum requirements. I mean, it's interesting to think about whether or not the current government will make any changes to that. Because they're generally deregulating the curriculum at the moment as it applies to schools. I don't know whether they'll make any changes as it applies to homeschooling. The previous government, about 4 or 5 years ago, did actually increase the regulation of homeschooling a little bit, and it caused quite a lot of controversy. I think the real increasing threat in England and Wales is, in terms of the schooling environments, is what we're calling free schools, which have very recently been introduced, which are sort of state-funded schools, so all the money's coming from the state, but they're sort of set up by, parental groups or church groups or other groups with a particular vested interest in some sort of education, and people sort of club together and provide education within them. And they are extremely unregulated in terms of the curriculum that they can teach. They won't even have to have qualified teachers. The people teaching there won't even need to have any sort of teaching qualification. So that's probably our equivalent in England and Wales in terms of the growing threat. Because who are the groups who really want to, who have an interest in setting up these sorts of schools? Groups that really want to pass on some particular tradition or set of ideas. And of course, those groups are very often religious groups. There's some homeschooling in the UK, but we did research on it at the time when the last government was thinking of regulating it further, and I don't think it would particularly prominently because of religious reasons. And sometimes it can be for the opposite reason, because, for example, there's still compulsory daily Christian worship, even in the non-religious publicly funded schools in England and Wales. So I know some parents who've removed their children from the state system because in the village where they live, for example, the primary school is very associated with a church, and they want to provide something slightly more different and more humanistic in a way. So I think our situation is somewhat different.
And I'm not an expert on this topic. This is not something I do for a living. It's just reading articles about it. We were actually looking into the idea of homeschooling. What would be the curricular packages. And these days, it's not like you take your kids home and you give them a Bible and you say, we need you to... There are certain standardized tests that they do have to pass at various points to make sure they're actually progressing through their knowledge. And a lot of that actually came in the No Child Left Behind Act, or whatever the legislation that went around that, to make sure that kids were meeting certain basic educational requirements. Usually the states write those and determine what the minimum educational standards are. But there are companies that provide these packages of education, but you can supplement them or remove from them whatever material you like. So there are, for example, Christian-based homeschooling groups who put together curricular packages for parents to use. In a lot of cases, the homeschoolers are actually going to a church to do their quote-unquote homeschooling because the church doesn't offer an accredited program. They don't have the requirements that would normally be involved. But the kids still need a place to go. And then they have, consultants there at the church that do this. Now, that's not all of them. In some cases, people are homeschooling because the U.S. public school system is self-destructing. It's underfunded at times. It's overpopulated, especially in certain areas where the density is high but the income is low. People are homeschooling just because there's nothing for their kids to do at school. If you have an exceptional student, you send them to the school system, which caters only to keeping kids from falling so far behind that the funding that's tied to their progress is removed from the school. You're not going to get a good education. That was our concern. My kids are really exceptional. I wanted to make sure that they were getting challenged and getting the attention they need to fully develop.
Any child born of a dinosaur is going to be exceptional. I have no doubt. But on that note, on that bombshell, we're going to move on to our next topic, and I want to talk about Christian values and whether, in particular, the United Kingdom is a Christian country. Again, Andrew, if I may start with you, and in particular, invite you to tell us about the poll that was taken earlier this year, sponsored by the Richard Dawkins Foundation, and what were the findings of that poll?
Well, this story begins actually some time ago because in Britain, like in many countries, we have a national census where various questions are asked of every single household in the country, and you have to answer them and turn in your return, and then we build a demographic picture of the nation out of that data. Now, it happens every 10 years, it's decennial, and in 2001, for the first time, a question was asked about religion. Now, we actually lobbied at the time to have a better question than was asked in the eventuality asked, because the question was, what is your religion? Which is a rather closed question, which makes a large number of assumptions. And the data, when it came out from that census a few years later, revealed that about 70%, 71% of people in England and Wales ticked Christian when asked this question. Now, various churches and Christian lobby groups were overjoyed by this data. It was more than they could have hoped for in their wildest dreams, because anyone who lives in England and Wales knows that, in fact, we're one of the most secular nations in Europe, never mind in the world. Over 90% of people never go to a place of worship in an average week in this country. 60% of people say they're not religious if you ask them if they are. And of course, we know that the reason that people ticked Christian in the census was because they have some sort of vague, attenuated cultural attachment. I'm not Muslim. I'm, English. I must sort of tick the Church of England, Christian type generic box. Well, because it was such a serious issue, this data, government began to use it, for example, to justify all sort of religious policies, like the expansion of faith schools. 70% of people are Christian, so why shouldn't we have more church schools, and so on and so forth? Because that happened, the British Humanist Association and then the Richard Dawkins Foundation began to commission research of our own to demonstrate that the people who ticked Christian in the census weren't really Christian in any religious sense. Now, the data that was revealed by these polls was extremely interesting. We found things like only over 50% of people who ticked Christian in the census didn't believe that Jesus Christ was a real person. About 65% of the people who ticked Christian in the census said that they weren't religious. Most people who ticked Christian in the census didn't believe in God. So there were all sorts of... Hang
on, I've got to have you repeat that. Say that again. How many percentage didn't believe in God but claimed to be Christian?
It was most of them, so it was over 50%, between 50 and 60. And as I say, only 48% of them believed that Jesus Christ was a real person who, was the Son of God. So all sorts of data combines to show that people who tick Christian in the census probably don't believe in God, certainly don't go ever to church, don't identify themselves as religious if you ask them, are you a religious person? And so the Richard Dawkins Foundation poll was the most recent. Ours was done the BHA's one was done the year before. And so we did publish this data, and it sparked a bit of a debate in the British press, in print and on television, because increasingly in the last few years, and especially under the previous government, we do have people telling us again and again that, you know, Britain is a Christian country, our values come from Christianity, our history is Christian, you know, all our laws and government come from Christianity. And of course...
Can I pause you there, because you raise an interesting point, and I just want to put a bit of background into this. One of the television programs we have in this country is called The Big Question, and it was actually back in February, the 19th of February, you appeared on that program, sitting next to Richard Dawkins shortly after this poll, or the findings of this poll had been published. Opposite you was a journalist from a newspaper, if you can call it such, the Daily Telegraph. Her name is Christine... can you help me there? Christine?
Yes, Christina. It was Christina Odoni.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've made a transcript of what she actually said during the course of that program when asked whether this is a Christian country, or she thought it was. Her arguments for saying so went along these lines. By Christian country, I mean that everything from the language we use every day comes from the Bible. Now, there's more. I have to pause there, because if that had been me at that point, I would have I would have not been able to contain myself. You do seem to have a remarkable ability, Andrew, in all the interviews I've seen you on television, to remain incredibly calm. Is this a part of your natural being, or is this something that you've adopted as a result of your current position?
Oh no, I agreed with her. I speak biblical Greek every day in my life, don't you? Biblical Greek and Hebrew, they're the languages I speak. No, I think that,
if Aramaic was good enough, no, that's the wrong way around.
That sort of stuff is absolutely ridiculous. I think you do have to remain calm in these sorts of situations. Inside you're thinking, oh, I can't believe not this again, and this is just the stupidest thing I've ever heard, the most ridiculous point I've ever heard. But I think there's if you blow up and make that sort of comment, then I don't think it really does you any good, because then you look like the unreasonable person when it's pretty clear that it's the other person saying these ridiculous things who's unreasonable. And of course, all that she said, I don't know whether you're going to say any more of it.
I am.
Oh, okay. Well, then I'll let you do that. But it's pretty, crazy.
It's banal. She goes on. The language you use every day comes from the Bible. Yeah, whatever. The church we walk past on our street is part of the Christian culture. Charity, all kinds of institutions, from hospitals to orphanages to schools, were founded by churches. So our culture is definitely a Christian culture. Now, to a degree, I'm going to come on to Christian values in a moment, don't worry. But to a degree, I suppose she's got half a point. It is part of our history.
Absolutely, but I think no more than in a historically contingent way. Of course it's part of our history, but everything that went before it and everything that came since it is also part of our history. So it depends when you decide to start the clock. It's a sort of arbitrary point that she's making. Lots of our laws came from pre-Christian Rome. Lots of our morality is something that we can observe around the world. It's pretty common to human societies and isn't rooted in any particular tradition. Lots of our culture came from pagan Greece. Lots of our culture came from pagan Scandinavia. The names of the days of the week, for example, which are just as relevant as the names of different times of the year, like Christmas. Or
the church that I walk past.
Or the church that I walk past, exactly.
Yeah. I want to go on there, because this is one that I want to open up the conversation about, which is, she was then asked, what are Christian values? And again, I made a transcript of what she said, and I'll try and read it in a non-mocking way. As I said, we have a culture that is Christian. It comes in what completely confounded Richard Dawkins was he thought, and she's talking here about the poll that was conducted by the foundation, the RDF, was that he thought that we were textbook Christians. He thought that we knew which was the first book of the Bible. He thought that we knew what the first 5 books of the Old Testament were called. No, that is not the kind of Christian we are. No, we are everyday Christians. It informs our everyday life, and it means that we do believe in charity, we do believe in helping others, we believe in turning the other cheek much, much more than if we were a totally secularist culture. I mean, there's so much I would like to comment on. I'm going to restrain myself just to a couple of points. It seems there that she's given no definition of Christian value, which is what I actually want people to comment on. What are Christian values? And so far as she has done, she has basically limited Christian values to being works of charity. Andrew.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, she's got really no point at all. The argument that Britain is a Christian country, or the values of British people come from Christianity, is one that's used by essentially advocates of a more religious public life. So it's really a sort of threat. What they're saying is that, you know, all the moral capital that your father and your grandfather and your great-grandfather banked, you know, was based on religion. And if you're not currently religious, you're squandering that capital, and eventually you'll have nothing left. You know, it's only religion that's given us this virtuous, even the possibility of virtue in society. And if you don't try and maintain it, or at least accept and support people who are trying to sustain it, then it will all just dribble away and will be, you know, red in tooth and claw and barbarically killing each other, and rape and pillage and uncharitable things. I mean, the problem is that she's, you know, Christina, but also other people, are saying things that aren't true. They're making severe factual errors. For example, pre-Christian cultures had all the positive pro-social concepts that Christian cultures had. Non-Christian cultures, look, for example, at China, you know, a huge part of the world that managed for many centuries to develop and to transmit systems of morality that had nothing to do with God, and specifically nothing to do with Christianity. And look at, you know, the world since Christianity, where very, you know, demonstrably, I would say, the secularization, especially of the Western world, has led to a much more moral population, a much more moral and civilized system of life, of law, of morality generally amongst the population. So, I mean, her case, for a start, you know, is built on untruths. You know, there's nothing distinctive or particularly admirable about Christian morality. It's also the case that Britain is not a Christian country empirically today, in the sense that most people are Christians. I mean, most people are not practicing Christians. They don't believe in God, by and large. They certainly don't engage in any sort of religious practice. Nor, if they did, is there any reason to believe at all, nor any evidence to convince us that their lives or the lives of other people's would be any better. So it's nonsense built on nonsense, really. And its only purpose is to attempt to extend and defend religious privilege.
Yeah, I really have to echo a lot of what Andrew was saying. It's something that I get a lot of too, is this, you can't be good without God. Our impulses towards charity and giving, and the impulses towards making a better society come from religion. And it's really one of the oldest canards, and I'm really glad, too, that I can see over the last few years of doing this type of work, and I'd like to get Andrew's opinion on this as well. I don't know if it's just what I'm looking at and the type of media I ingest, but I can see that fewer and fewer people are actually taking that position. That I think there has been sort of a shift in public feeling, and I think a lot of it comes from the work that our types of organizations have done to promote humanist values and to promote ethical works and charitable works. And I'm particularly proud that a lot of groups in the US and in Britain and in Canada have been really making that a focus, have been trying more and more to be emphasizing charitable works, and that many people are getting involved. Like, I think DPR, to credit you as well, the MSF fundraiser every year is another good example of doing that type of work. That we're starting to shift the population's understanding of that. And Andrew, have you found that in your work as well?
Well, there is a growing recognition, which you can see in the various systematic polling that's done of social attitudes in Britain, a growing recognition that there is no clear connection between religion and morality, and that non-religious people are behaving in just as pro-social or moral ways, or sometimes even more so, than religious people do. I mean, I think, for example, of a recent government research that was done about volunteering and civic participation in England, and the percentage of non-religious people doing various sorts of volunteering work in their communities was exactly the same as the percentage of Christians, and way higher than the percentage of Jews or Muslims or Hindus or Sikhs, and almost all the other religions apart from Christianity. And I think that increasingly people do understand that. I absolutely agree with you that it's an important aspect of our work, all of our work, in promoting a non-religious view of the world, to point out those important lessons about morality, that, morality is something that is totally separable from religion, that is separate from religion, that existed before the religious systems currently existing in the world were even thought of, and that morality is a sort of organised attempt by human beings to reinforce our own social impulses that we have as a result of our nature as social animals, and an important endeavour that religion gets in the way of. So I think that is a very important plank in our agenda, very much.
Concordance.
I'm sorry, this is on a slightly different topic, but I never had a chance to talk about some of the survey information from the U.S. It bears on this, though. It bears on this in terms of where we derive our morality. I find survey results both highly, highly depressing, but also always surprising. Because the people I am around all the time, when I'm not at work, are deeply fundamentalist religious people here in Texas. But when you look at national surveys, and I want to give you the percentage of people who expressed a belief in this particular item, to give you as an index, the number of people in the U.S. who, when polled, say that they accept the Darwinian account of evolution. 45%.
I thought we were going to have a guessing game.
We could have. Sorry, 45%.
Okay.
For contrast, psychic or spiritual healing, 55% of people accept psychic or spiritual healing. 42%, only slightly less than evolution, believe in demonic possession. This is the country I live in. 72% of people believe in angels. These are people who apparently give a few more. 32% believe in UFOs. 26% believe in astrology. 70% believe in the physical resurrection of Jesus. 61% believe in an actual hell. These people look around them and they are terrified. But it reflects a mentality in these people. They honestly believe that the supernatural, things that they cannot understand or control, are out there influencing their everyday lives. They're terrified, I would imagine, of the battle going on invisibly around them between devils and angels. And you come to them and say, morality is a quiet, peaceful thing that we arrive at by self-reflection. And, evolution is just the tip of the iceberg. Human-derived morality is a very small thing to someone that honestly believes that angels are around them all the time.
Can I just throw this in, though, Concordance? Much like the census which was conducted in 2001 in the United Kingdom, as Andrew had said, to a degree the answers you get depend on the questions that you ask. And when a further survey was done by the Richard Dawkins Foundation, as we heard about, it uncovers actually what people really believe. And I just suspect that the way in which people are questioned in that US poll may, if the questions had been somewhat different, do you really believe in fairies or whatever, and they were examined in detail, perhaps the results would be different. Or am I being too optimistic?
We don't know. I mean, there's no way to be actually sure. Even if you do like a cross-index question where you ask the same thing but from a slightly different perspective, or you ask a follow-up that would, sort of tie into that primary question, the results come up pretty consistent. So you've got Gallup polls and Harris polls. They generally come up with very similar answers. I honestly believe that from the people I've met who are not scientists, that there's an awful lot of belief in weird stuff, in paranormal and supernatural phenomena. People who say, oh, I totally believe in ghosts because I had this weird experience. 60% of people say they've had a spiritual transcendent experience. 62% of people said that they could know who was on the phone before they picked it up, other than using caller ID, I assume.
Andrew.
I mean, I'm really interested in those statistics, and I'm quite interested to know, why this is, why this should be. What is it about, society in the US that nurtures not only these Christian beliefs, these religious beliefs, but also these sort of, broader irrational non-scientific beliefs, and I'd be really interested in knowing more about that. I mean, I think this, to some extent.
Sorry, can I pause you there because it's a relevant moment. I can't tell whether this is backwards or not. That's a good book for anyone wanting to understand why people believe in strange things. It's by Michael Shermer, The Believing Brain. It's backwards for me, but there you are. That's actually a good starter, and it includes, at its opening chapter, some of these statistics that Concordance just referred to.
And does it look at a comparison between countries like Britain or Sweden or France and the United States? I mean, that's what's interesting, I think.
To a degree, it does.
Okay.
I can't remember.
I can't remember the answer.
The answer, but I don't want to misquote him. But it's a good book. I'll include it in the links when these are posted on YouTube.
I mean, one belief that does persist, even in very secular countries, in Europe, for example, and certainly in the UK, is a belief in life after death. That's one of the things that continues even after all other sorts of beliefs are gone. If you look at graph lines over time that show beliefs in England, for example, everything tails off. Religious practice tails off. Religious belief in God tails off. Religious identity tails off. Belief in Jesus tails off. But belief in life after death remains pretty static. And there's some good evidence to show that a continuing belief in life after death is not something, is something also, well, it goes up actually as people get older. And there's good evidence to show that, or to suggest rather, that that's an aspect of age rather than cohort. Which is quite interesting. So, I mean, people who are sort of 25 now in England and aren't religious are probably not going to suddenly become religious when they get to the age of 60. Probably the higher current religiosity amongst people over 60 is an artifact of the cohort, the generation, rather than the age. But there's some evidence to show that belief in life after death is something that changes with age. Sorry, I've got that the wrong way around. Did I just say that as you get older, you're more likely to believe in life after death? I meant to say that as you get older, you're less likely to believe in life after death.
I think that my exposure to the reality, because I live a very sheltered existence among, people with PhDs, decades of science training and experience. Not a lot of them have weird beliefs. Most of them have a very good critical thinking, developed skills, but not all. There are still some very good scientists with some very dumb ideas and reasons for having those beliefs. Where I see this, and where I think if I were a sociologist I would be studying this phenomena, would be on Facebook. Facebook has opened my eyes to my extended network of friends and the crazy things that they believe, uncritically, that they read on the internet. I think the internet has had such a profound influence on the kinds of weird things that we are prepared to accept. And if you look through Facebook, and you've all probably got, one or two of those weird friends who are always talking about ghosts or aliens or, ESP or the vast conspiracy to lose your left sock in the dryer, right? All those kinds of things. They create now their own sub-communities, and it's fractal all the way down. So you have all these sub-communities of weird beliefs that form little echo chambers where they reaffirm each other's beliefs. And that, I think, was what Christianity had in spades for so long. That's what really led to the flourishing of organized religion, is it became an echo chamber with its own, what we might say, doctrinal requirements. I think that's now starting to form on the internet for all these other fields, all these little new religions, new age religions. The women, especially on my Facebook feed, who buy into new age mysticism and the Deepak Chopra and The Secret and the Oprah pseudoscience, the stuff that you hear about on primetime TV. You see it on the Discovery Channel, which used to be a channel that talked about science. Now it's the all ghost and UFO channel. Even the History Channel here in the U.S. Has started taking on ghosts and the paranormal and Bigfoot hunters, and we're entertained by it. And obviously it has an impact on people's lives. To me, that's a sign that we have failed utterly at some point in educating the American public.
I'm not going to disagree with that. But you invited me to promote the charity event next weekend earlier on, and I'm going to do that now. So we still haven't got the callers. I see people in the chat saying that they've sent contact requests. I have certainly not received them. But if you are going to send one, it's the Magic Sandwich Show, all one word. Include the topic or the gist of the topic or the question that you have, and we will get you on. The lines are free at the moment. But as I say, let me take this opportunity to mention the charity event which is taking place next weekend. It starts Saturday, the 8th of September at 4 p.m. UK time. It's another 24-hour non-stop internet show in support of the charity Médecins Sans Frontières, Doctors Without Borders. I do encourage people to support it, not only because of the charity itself. I think is it's untouchable, beyond reproach. It assists people with medical issues, particularly in cases of natural disasters. It does a lot of other work as well. If you want more information, just go to the Magic Sandwich Show website. There is a page dedicated to next week's event. I'm particularly excited because we're starting off the first hour from one of the lecture halls of the physics department of Nottingham University, where I'm going to be joined by some of those that appear on the 60 Symbols show channel, which if you're not familiar with it, you ought to be, and also some of the periodic videos channel, who are chemists. So we are literally going to be starting off the first hour with a huge bang and lots of experiments and some debunking, and also some music from Professor Moriarty. Yes, that is his name, Professor Moriarty. Nothing to do with Sherlock Holmes, but he would be there as well. One thing that I would invite people to do, over the last 3 years that we've been running this event, we've raised over $100,000. About 25% of that each year has come from items which you have donated and which have been auctioned on eBay. For some reason this year, I don't know, those that are donating items to the eBay auction are down significantly. So if you have anything at all that you would be able to offer for auction, may I invite you please to send an email to msfebay@ymail.com, and I will actually put that email address above the chat box on Blog TV.